In the 90s, the Marvel Universe found its home in Saturday morning cartoons. An entire generation of shows came from the era. Some were hits, some were misses, but others went on to define these characters for an entire generation. One of the things that made the era so special was that the characters and stories were pretty faithful adaptations of the comics. No one ever felt the need to dumb things down for a younger audience. Now you fast forward to the modern age, and we aren't quite so lucky. Despite maybe 2 good shows in the last 10 years, Marvel animation has just never stuck to the cultural zeitgeist the way it did in the 90s. And in my opinion, we've been in a bit of a Marvel animation dark age since the early 2010s. But with Marvel's What If, it seems like that's all about to change. But before we talk about that, let's talk about what came before and what led us to where we are today. Now of course you've got the classic cartoons from the 60s to the 80s, then you hit the 90s and you have the Marvel animation renaissance era, shows like X-Men, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Hulk, and Silver Surfer. All of these are considered classic Marvel cartoons.
This is a certified hood classic.
But then you also had their successors, Avengers United They Stand, and Spider-Man Unlimited. Shows that never met the critical or financial success that the others had, and made it a lot harder for these shows to get made in the future.
I need that money.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
Which made for a much slower turnaround in Marvel media come the turn of the century. But that didn't stop Marvel for long, because throughout the 2000s, Marvel made more than a few attempts to get back into the fray. We saw Spider-Man the new animated series on MTV, which only lasted a season. We saw X-Men Evolution, which was actually pretty successful and influential in terms of 2000s Marvel cartoons. Really, it's one of the only success stories. And then they also outsourced a Fantastic Four cartoon to the French studio that made Code Lyoko, also canceled after just 1 season. There were some motion comics, they licensed out a few franchises for anime adaptations, lots of tiny quakes, but no noticeable roars. They definitely never had anything that hit like the DCAU shows or Teen Titans had, except for maybe Spectacular Spider-Man, but unfortunately that show kind of fell apart due to the licensing issues. So in the whole of the 2000s, you have maybe 2 Marvel cartoons that are actually worth note. The rest are pretty forgivable, even if they are loved by the niche communities that know of them. So now we work our way up to the late 2000s, early 2010s, with Wolverine and the X-Men, and Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Despite being on competing networks, the shows still shared a loose continuity and managed to introduce their lore and characters in really compelling ways. But that didn't matter much in the end, because changing tides were coming soon. Jeph Loeb overtook Marvel's TV studios, including their animation, and scrapped their current lineup of shows in favor of more MCU-adjacent shows with cheaper, less expensive animation. All aimed at a noticeably younger demographic, crushing what could have been Marvel's DCAU in one fell swoop. Which leads us to where we are today, with a bunch of shows that no one likes aimed at toddlers. People asked me to make a video on the subject for a long time, so let me address it here. These shows are great for children in the same way shows like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends were, or Superhero Squad are. But they don't bring much to the table for older demographics. They're extremely toyetic, obviously aimed at young children, and the animation just looks cheap and ugly. There are a lot of complaints about these shows, a whole video's worth really, but that's the main gist of my major issues with them. Jeph Loeb canceled 2 of the most popular shows that Marvel Animation had to offer, and replaced them with a slew of the most hated and frowned upon shows in the fandom. And thus we enter the dark age of Marvel Animation. But there were a few glimpses of hope. There was a Deadpool show that got greenlit for Hulu before it got canceled. And then they greenlit 4 shows about Monkey, Dazzler, Tigra, and MODOK, and then they got canceled. Except for MODOK, which apparently sucked anyway. I don't really know, I didn't watch it. Go watch Godzilla Mendoza's video if you want to know more about it. But the fact that they canceled these shows so quickly gives me hope in an odd way. I mean, honestly, I wasn't very hyped for the shows to begin with, so, I didn't have much to lose, right? Because pretty soon after those Hulu shows got canceled, they announced this.
What if?
And I think that the cancellation of those Hulu shows could be emblematic that What If resulted in Marvel changing their goals for animations. And with them announcing that they were making a new sub-studio for animation, I think that I might be onto something there.
What If seems like a huge indicator of Marvel's plans moving forward. It's their way of having a show set in continuity without having to agree that it's fixed canon or have the movies acknowledge it if things go south and fans end up not liking the series or one of its takes on the characters. If things go south, then these episodes are testing grounds. They're toy boxes, experiments with lore, timelines that can easily be pruned and ignored if need be. But if things go well, then this is only the beginning. What If fulfills on promises that the movies failed to keep, kind of like how shows like WandaVision did. It expands on pre-existing characterization in a way that the movies don't necessarily have to acknowledge without multiverse shenanigans, kind of like Loki or even Coulson in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. With the end of Loki, we know that What If is canon to the MCU on the same level as the other Disney Plus shows. But with the success of the show in mind, then why wouldn't you take it a step further? Instead of having an animated series that takes place in an alternate universe alongside the MCU, why not have an animated series that takes place in the MCU? Kind of like the MCU's own Clone Wars. And here's why I think that needs to happen. An animated series could build on the lore of the MCU and develop its characters by having it take place during points in continuity that we didn't get to see on screen. The show could largely focus on past events and retcons and then save future points in the timeline for the live-action adaptations. A lot like how Clone Wars did for Star Wars, with it enriching the lore of the Sith and Anakin's descent and so much more. Like, did you ever feel like Hulk and Widow's romance was cheapened by how most of it happened off-screen? Or like the core cast of characters didn't get near enough screen time together before Endgame? Or was there ever a particular character interaction that you wanted to see on screen but the movies never really got to? Like, we never really got many Thor Captain America moments, even though we did get the whole Mjolnir moment at the end of Endgame. Well, this is where they can really open that toy box back up and really play with and build on and expand the lore in really interesting ways by establishing things retroactively. Kind of like Star Wars and the Expanded Universe before Disney bought it out. And you know what? Here's a good place to start. Fury's Big Week. The premise of Fury's Big Week is that Iron Man 2, Thor, and Incredible Hulk are all happening during the same time during the same week. You can actually watch Coulson leave Iron Man 2 and then track him right to Thor's hammer. The story even establishes the fact that Widow was present during the events of Incredible Hulk, and that she even apprehended the leader. And that's an idea that What If kinda took and ran with, which kinda proves that Fury's Big Week is the perfect premise for some kind of MCU-based animated series, or at least the first season of one. Other MCU tie-in comics establish why War Machine wasn't around to help out during Avengers, or other odds and ends of continuity. But these are the perfect ideas to build off of to help flesh out and establish what already exists in the Marvel Universe, and kind of give it another level of depth. Not by introducing new characters or concepts, but by just building on what's already there. Maybe even taking characters and concepts from the new movies and explaining what they were up to during previous events in the MCU. Which brings me to the next point that I need to X off my list. I've had this running theory that when the X-Men are introduced into the MCU, it's gonna be because Scarlet Witch pulled a reverse House of M and wished them into existence. That'll rewrite everyone's memories and reality as a whole, and then everyone in the MCU will just pretend the X-Men were always around, because Scarlet Witch retconned them into existing. They could maybe even do things like retconning the X-Men into an Endgame flashback, or even having a scene of Wolverine meeting Captain America during World War II. More on that idea later. But if that were the case, and RDJ, Chris Evans, and Scarlett Johansson aren't around to meet Wolverine, Cyclops, and Xavier face to face, then wouldn't an animated version taking their place be the next best thing? They've already established precedent, with some characters reappearing in What If, done by different voice actors than the actors that played them in the movies. So with that in mind, maybe it wouldn't be too jarring to see characters like Iron Man come back for a new story set in the past pre-Endgame, albeit in animated form.
He's back! In pod form!
Think about how Clone Wars worked wonders for characters like Maul or Grievous, or even the lore of the Sith Lords in general. That show even managed to connect back to lore from games like Knights of the Old Republic. And you could do something very similar with the MCU here. You could give characters like Hulk the character development and screen time that fans have always been asking for, or having Iron Man and Captain Marvel team up between Infinity War and Endgame, establishing that Carol got pretty close to the Avengers in the time after Infinity War. Or even by having a new voice actor temporarily take on the role of T'Challa, fulfilling on the promise of his romance with Nakia, and maybe giving the character a proper send-off afterwards. If outright recasting the character for live action would be too distasteful, then maybe doing a Paul Walker-style animated tribute would be the best way to give his character a final send-off on screen. Wouldn't that be better than just writing the character off screen? But you know what, I digress, maybe I'm wrong about that. What I'm getting at though, is when you look back at some of the one-shot shorts like Agent Carter, Item 47, or Hail to the King, you can see the DNA that evolved into projects like the Agent Carter TV series, or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or even Shang-Chi. So with all that in mind, here's my pitch for a Marvel MCU animated series. During Captain America First Avenger, there's this montage, and during that montage there's something like a 1.5-year time skip. And that's where the story would take place, right in the middle of World War II, and it'd be about the invaders. I'd start by reintroducing the android Human Torch that cameoed in the first Avenger. Then later episodes would go on to feature characters like Logan, Captain Britain, Namor, and maybe even T'Challa's grandfather as the Black Panther of World War II, with each episode focusing on a different hero and a different team-up. And then the season finale of it, a lot like Mandalorian, would feature Captain America calling in all his friends for favors. There are a lot of ways you could build on that old stuff without getting in the way of anything that the movies or shows want to do in the future. Kinda like what If is already doing. So with all that in mind, what do you think the future of Marvel animation looks like? Would you rather see more MCU-based animation, or would you rather see stories told in a new universe? Maybe both? And what do you think of the Disney XD Marvel cartoons? I've been getting requests to cover those shows for years now, so I hope I did a good job covering them here. I even mentioned that idea all the way back in the Earth's Mightiest Heroes video like 2 years ago. So I hope I did a good job explaining how I feel about those shows. If you think differently, then I'd love to hear what you think about them. And as always, I'd like to give a huge shout out to my lovely supporters on Patreon. Y'all keep this swim ship sailing. And if you want to talk comics, then come join the Discord. There's a link in the description below. And if you like this video on Marvel cartoons, then I've got a few others, covering everything from Avengers EMH, to Wolverine and the X-Men, Spectacular Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk, and even Silver Surfer. The link should be on screen now, and if it's not, then just give it some time, because it'll come up in a second. But as always, thanks for watching the video, and thank you for sticking around so long. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe with that notification bell on if you dug the video. And as always, I've been Swim Team Captain 7 of Super Swim Team 7. Signing off.